There are moments in life when the veil between what we know and what we can't explain thins, and we find ourselves standing on the precipice of something truly unsettling. This isn't a story for the faint of heart, or for those who cling to the comforting illusion that everything has a logical explanation. No, this is a tale woven from the threads of grief, suspicion, and a chilling series of events that began, as many profound tragedies do, with an ending. It was a cold, unforgiving autumn day when the small town of Havenwood buried its beloved Eleanor Vance. Everyone knew Eleanor, a vibrant, almost ethereal woman whose laughter was as infectious as her kindness was boundless. She was the kind of person who seemed to defy the very concept of mortality, making her sudden, unexplained death all the more bewildering. The official cause was a sudden, massive heart attack, but a whisper, a faint, unsettling murmur, had begun to circulate through the quiet streets, suggesting something far more sinister. Eleanor was only 42, a picture of health, and the idea of her heart simply giving out felt wrong. Her husband, Thomas Vance, a man known for his stoic demeanor and his work as a meticulous historical archivist, was utterly devastated. Or so it seemed. His grief was a performance, flawlessly executed, yet beneath the surface, a certain calculating glint in his eyes, a fraction too long of a pause before he spoke of his sorrow, hinted at a man playing a part. The funeral itself was a blur of black attire, hushed condolences, and the heavy scent of lilies. Friends and family gathered, their faces etched with a shared sense of loss, but also with that unspoken question hanging in the air. How? Why? Among them was Eleanor's older sister, Beatrice, a woman whose sharp intellect and even sharper wit had always made her the unofficial family detective. Beatrice, a retired forensic psychologist with a keen eye for detail and an even keener intuition, found Thomas's grief a little too perfect. His tears seemed to dry too quickly, his composure too readily regained. She watched him, her gaze unwavering, as he offered comfort to the mourners, a perfect husband in mourning, yet a chill snaked down her spine every time his eyes met hers. She knew him, knew his history, and a creeping unease began to settle in her stomach. Eleanor and Thomas's marriage had always been viewed by outsiders as idyllic. A charming house nestled by the Havenwood Lake, two beautiful children, Lily, 16, with Eleanor's bright eyes and artistic soul, and Daniel, 12, quiet and observant, much like Thomas. But behind the closed doors of their seemingly perfect life, a different narrative was unfolding. Eleanor had confided in Beatrice just weeks before her death, her voice trembling with a fear that Beatrice now replayed endlessly in her mind. "He's changing, Bea," Eleanor had whispered. "He's darker. There are things he says, things he does, that scare me." She hadn't elaborated, promising to explain more later, a promise now tragically unfulfilled. Beatrice had pressed her, but Eleanor had only shaken her head, a haunted look in her eyes. "It's about his family, his past. Something I found." Now, standing by Eleanor's coffin, Beatrice felt a surge of regret for not pushing harder, for not demanding answers. The image of Eleanor's face, pale and serene in death, was almost too much to bear. It was then, amidst the solemnity and the silent prayers, that a small, almost imperceptible detail snagged Beatrice's attention. On a side table, amidst a collection of Eleanor's favorite photographs, stood a framed picture taken just a few months prior. It showed Eleanor, radiant and laughing, sitting beside Thomas on a picnic blanket by the lake. A happy memory, meant to soothe grieving hearts. But as Beatrice glanced at it again, a flicker of something caught her eye. Was it the light? Or had Eleanor's head, in the photograph, tilted ever so slightly to the left? She blinked, chalking it up to fatigue and grief-addled vision. Yet, the unsettling feeling persisted. A tiny stone dropped into the calm waters of her resolve. The reception following the funeral was held at the Vance's home, a tradition in Havenwood for those who had passed too soon. The house, usually filled with Eleanor's vibrant energy, now felt cold, sterile, almost watchful. Thomas, ever the gracious host, moved through the crowd, accepting condolences, his voice smooth, his smile practiced. Beatrice, however, found herself drawn to the same side table where the photograph had been displayed. She needed to see it again, to confirm if her eyes had truly deceived her. As she approached, a cold dread washed over her. The photograph was still there, but now, undeniably, Eleanor's head was tilted to the left, significantly more than she remembered. It was a subtle shift, one that most wouldn't notice, but to Beatrice, whose mind catalogued every detail, it was glaring. Her heart began to pound with an uneasy rhythm. This wasn't just fatigue, this wasn't just grief. This was something else. This was impossible. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and carefully picked up the frame. The glass was cool smooth. She scrutinized the image. There was no mistaking it. The angle of Eleanor's head was distinctly different. A cold sweat broke out on her brow. Was someone playing a cruel trick? But who and why? The thought was absurd. This was a house of mourning, a place where grief hung heavy in the air. Who would dare to tamper with a memorial to the deceased? She looked around the room. Everyone was engaged in hushed conversations, eating the delicate finger foods, trying to make sense of their loss. No one seemed to notice her or the photograph. She remembered Eleanor's hushed confession about Thomas's dark side, about something she had found regarding his family and past. A new, terrifying possibility began to form in her mind, a monstrous idea that she immediately tried to push away. But the image in her hand, the moved photograph, was a stubborn testament to the impossible. It defied logic, defied reason, and yet it was right there, staring back at her. This wasn't just a simple photograph. It was a silent scream, a chilling prelude to a truth far more disturbing than anyone could possibly imagine. The funeral photo had moved, and no one was looking. Or so it seemed. Beatrice knew, with a certainty that sent shivers down her spine, that this was only the beginning. The story of Eleanor Vance's death was far from over. The cold feel of the photo frame was still haunting Beatrice as she left Thomas's house. She clutched the picture tight, the cold glass seeming to convey a silent message, a warning from Eleanor. She no longer had any doubts. This was no trick, no hallucination. There was a force at work, and it was not benevolent. That night, as Beatrice drove home in the pouring rain, Eleanor's last words kept replaying in her mind, like a broken record. It's something I found. It's about his family, his past. The unnatural shift of the photograph had given those whispered words a new, terrifying meaning. Eleanor wasn't just afraid. She had discovered something. At midnight, Beatrice sat in her study, a single lamp casting a dim light over a pile of old Vance family documents she had taken from Thomas. She knew that as an archivist, Thomas would have everything meticulously documented. What she was looking for wasn't a public secret, but a discrepancy, a crack in his carefully curated story. She started with the official records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds. Everything matched up perfectly, nothing suspicious. She flipped through page after page, a rising sense of frustration building inside her. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her grief had made her imagine things. But then, something small caught her attention. An old notebook, tucked away at the bottom of a file. It wasn't an official record, just a small, tattered journal, clumsily hidden. Inside, she found a series of handwritten notes in Latin, accompanied by strange symbols and indecipherable glyphs. The notes weren't Thomas's, but his great-grandfather's, Eleanor Vance, who had died years ago. The script was messy and hard to read, but one word repeated itself over and over, sending a chill down Beatrice's spine. Dominus. The Lord. And beneath it was a phrase she recognized from her studies of ancient religions, tenebrae sanguis, the dark blood. Just then, she heard a knock on her door. Her heart pounded. Who would be here at this hour? She peered through the peephole and saw Daniel, Eleanor, and Thomas's son. He stood there, his eyes wide with panic, rain streaking down his face. "Aunt Beatrice," he said, his voice trembling, "you have to come. Something's wrong with Mom." Beatrice quickly opened the door, pulling him inside. Your mother is gone, Daniel." He shook his head frantically. "No, she's not. I know she's here." He pointed to an old jewelry box Beatrice didn't recognize. Mom gave it to me. She told me to keep it safe and never let Dad know. And if anything happened, to give it to you. Beatrice took the box, the familiar coldness spreading through her fingers. Everything was falling into place. Eleanor had known. She had prepared for this. Inside the box, besides an old moon-shaped necklace, was a small, carefully rolled-up piece of paper. Inside was a small, silver piece of metal, etched with the exact same symbol Beatrice had just seen in Eleanor Vance's notebook. And beneath it, a tiny handwritten note from Eleanor. He killed Grandma. And now he's coming back for them all. Be careful. The photos are watching. An electric shock went through Beatrice. What was this piece of metal? And who is he? Not Thomas, but something else. Something hidden in the Vance family. She looked down at the metal piece, which seemed to emanate an eerie energy. It was no simple amulet, but something of great spiritual significance and power. She looked at the terrified face of Daniel, who was shivering from having witnessed things no child should ever have to. His distress wasn't just the grief of losing his mother, but a genuine fear of something unseen, something monstrous. As Daniel told his story, his voice stuttering with fear, the narrative started to become clearer and even more terrifying. Dad told Mom he was going back for the collection. Thomas hadn't been talking about objects. He was talking about the dead. The family members who were buried and their funeral photos. Thomas was an archivist. What was one of his jobs? Archiving images. Thinking about the photos that changed, Beatrice realized a horrifying truth. This wasn't a random attack. This was a systematic hunt. It had been going on for generations. And Thomas had been continuing his great-grandfather's work. He wasn't a killer. He was simply an enforcer. As she tried to comfort Daniel, her phone vibrated. It was Thomas. His voice was silky, but as cold as ice. Beatrice. I know the boy came to you. I know you have what she took. Return it. Now. Before you become a part of the collection. Thomas's words were not a threat, but a chilling statement of fact. He didn't have to attack her. He just had to wait. Wait for Eleanor's photo to move again. And then, she would be the next victim of the collection. Beatrice hung up, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Daniel, then at the box in her hands. She was no longer a retired psychologist. She was a detective, a protector. And she was the next target. The door to a world of mystery and horror had just opened, and there was no way to close it. Thomas's cold threat still echoed in Beatrice's ears. She looked at the trembling Daniel and knew she couldn't stay here. Her house was no longer safe. Tucking Eleanor's box into her bag, she led Daniel to her car, deciding to drive to a place where no one could find them, at least for a while. As her car pulled away, she looked back at the house, and in the flickering streetlights, she saw a figure standing at the second-floor window. It was Thomas. He didn't wave or nod. He just stood there, motionless, a macabre smile spreading across his face. The smile of a predator. On the way, as she drove through the deserted streets, the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Daniel's story about the collection, the notes in Alistair's journal, and the mysterious metal piece. It wasn't a collection of art or objects. It was a collection of souls. The Vance family weren't historical archivists, but soul collectors. They preserved the images of those they had chosen to become part of their ghostly collection. Beatrice thought about Eleanor's funeral photo, the photo that had moved. It wasn't a simple ghostly prank. It was a ritual. Eleanor's soul had been captured in that photograph. And perhaps, if she didn't intervene, her soul would eventually be completely possessed. She needed a refuge, a place Thomas wouldn't expect. She thought of the family's old holiday home on the outskirts of town, a place only the closest family members knew about. It was a small old house, with a cellar that housed an old wine cellar. She remembered Eleanor saying she hated the place, saying she felt cold and lonely there. Now, Beatrice understood why. The house was part of the Vance family history. When they arrived, Beatrice unlocked the door and turned on the lights. The air was cold and heavy, as if something had been there for a long time. As she brought Daniel inside, the boy stiffened, his eyes wide. Aunt Beatrice, he whispered, his voice trembling, I feel like there are so many people here. Beatrice's intuition, honed by years of working with the most incomprehensible aspects of the human psyche, told her Daniel wasn't imagining things. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it too. A sense of being watched. She led Daniel down to the cellar, where the old wine cellar remained. She lit a candle and explored. Most of the shelves were empty, but there was a hidden shelf in a secluded corner. As she brushed away the cobwebs, she found a collection of photo frames. Not family photos. They were all funeral photos of deceased Vance family members. Alistair, Thomas's father, and others. There was even a photo of Thomas's grandmother. Beatrice shuddered. But then, one photo caught her attention. It was a photo of a young woman. She had fiery red hair and a warm smile. She was on her deathbed, and it seemed the photo was taken just after she passed away. Below the photo, the name was scrawled, Alara. Beatrice recalled what Eleanor had said about Thomas's family and the secret she had found. Beatrice no longer had any doubts. This was Thomas's sister, Alara. Thomas had told Eleanor that Alara had died in a car accident, but it was a lie. Alara had died in this very house, in this very bed. As she held the photo of Alara, a sudden bright light filled the room. Thomas was there, standing at the doorway. He was wearing a black funeral suit, his face emotionless, but in his eyes was a malevolent fire. He was holding an empty photo frame. I knew you'd be here, Thomas said, his voice echoing in the small space. And I knew you'd find our collection. Beatrice clutched the photo of Alara. You killed your sister. You killed your wife. Thomas smiled a macabre smile. No, I didn't kill them. I just collected them. My family has been doing this for generations. Alistair did it to my parents. My father did it to my grandfather. And now, I'm doing it to my wife. It's a gift. It's a legacy. Beatrice couldn't comprehend. That's insane. Insane? Thomas repeated. No, it's power. The metal piece in Eleanor's box is the key. It holds a piece of our ancestors' soul. It allows us to control the dead. It allows us to preserve them, and they serve us. Eleanor found it. She broke the chain. But she was too late. Thomas approached. Why do you think the photo moved? It's a sign. A sign that the soul has been trapped. And I will finish the job. Beatrice backed away, holding Daniel close. You won't do it. You'll never. I already have, Thomas said, holding up the empty photo frame. I've already done it to Lily. My daughter. She is a part of the collection. And now, so are you, Beatrice. A wave of horror washed over Beatrice. Lily, Eleanor's 16-year-old daughter. Thomas had done it to his own daughter. A shocking twist. His grief for his daughter wasn't fake. It was a possession. He already had her soul. A terrified scream came from Daniel. He saw a faint, ghostly image of his sister, Lily, appearing next to Thomas. She stood there, her eyes empty, soulless, and her head tilted to the right, just like Eleanor in the photo. Thomas smiled. Eleanor's soul will be completely possessed when your soul is replaced. You see, Beatrice. You wasted too much time. Now, there's only one choice left. He held up the empty photo frame, his eyes gleaming like a predator. Beatrice knew she was facing an undeniable truth. She was the prey. And there was only one way to end it all: sacrifice. She had to find a way to destroy this collection, to free Eleanor's and Lily's souls, even if it meant she had to become a part of it. As Thomas moved closer, Beatrice knew she had to act. She had the metal piece. She had the photo of Alara. She would not let him harm Daniel. A spark of determination ignited in her eyes. The final showdown had begun, and the outcome would decide the fate of them all. Thomas held up the empty photo frame, his eyes filled with madness. In the flickering candlelight, he no longer looked like a human, but like a shadow haunted by an ancient power. Beatrice backed away, holding the trembling Daniel close. She knew she couldn't escape. She had to fight. In a fleeting moment, she looked down at the box Eleanor had given to Daniel. The silver metal piece, the symbol of captivity and power. A reckless idea dawned on her. Thomas needed the photos to complete his collection. He needed her soul. So, she would give him what he wanted, but on her own terms. Beatrice gently placed Daniel on the floor, whispering to the boy, "Run outside and call the police. Don't come back, no matter what happens." Daniel looked at her, his eyes welling up with tears, but he nodded, understanding that this was a matter of life and death. As Daniel ran out of the room, Thomas moved closer. "It's too late," he laughed. "No one can save you. No one can save them." Beatrice held up the photo of Alara, the one she had taken from the cellar. "What did you do to your sister?" she asked, her voice filled with outrage. "Alara was the first," Thomas said, his voice filled with a strange pride. "She was the first I collected. She was strong, but not strong enough. She tried to break the chain. But she failed." Beatrice knew she had to act immediately. She pulled the metal piece from her pocket, holding it in her hand. The metal was cold and heavy, but a strange power seemed to be pulsating through it. It wasn't a mere amulet. It was a key to unlock the imprisoned souls. As Thomas closed in, he prepared to place the empty photo frame over her face. She closed her eyes. Just then, a silver light flashed from the metal piece in her hand. She felt a powerful surge of energy, a psychic shockwave that swept through the room. A terrified scream erupted, not from Beatrice, but from Thomas. He recoiled, clutching his head. The empty photo frame fell to the floor, shattering into pieces. Ghostly, translucent figures began to appear around him. They were the souls of the captured, Alara, his grandmother, and Eleanor. And Lily. The souls were no longer soulless. Their eyes were filled with anger and hatred. They surrounded Thomas, the whispers of their resentment pounding in his ears. "You took us. You took us." Thomas shrieked in horror. "No, it can't be. You can't." But then, something even more horrifying happened. The funeral photo of Eleanor, which Beatrice had been holding, began to fade. The metal piece in Beatrice's hand grew hot, and an even more powerful surge of energy was released. She watched as Eleanor's image in the photo began to dissolve. Her soul was being set free. Thomas stood there, trapped between the angry souls he had imprisoned. Their spirits began to merge, forming a swirling, ghostly vortex. Thomas was pulled into it, his face contorting in terror. Beatrice closed her eyes. She knew she had succeeded. She had freed Eleanor, Lily, and the other souls. She had broken the chain. When she opened her eyes, Thomas was gone. All that remained was the shattered photo frame, the metal piece, and a coldness that seeped into her bones. A moment later, the police arrived, but they found nothing but Beatrice and a messy cellar. They didn't believe her story, attributing it to a mental breakdown from Eleanor's death. But Beatrice knew the truth. Thomas had become a part of his own collection, imprisoned by the very souls he had collected. Beatrice returned home with Daniel. Life was never the same. She had lost loved ones, and she had witnessed something unbelievable. But she had also found something, a new strength, a resilience she never knew she had. She had become a guardian to the departed souls, ensuring that no such collection would ever be created again. On a night, as Daniel slept, Beatrice sat by the window, looking up at the starry sky. She held the small metal piece in her hand, now cold. It no longer emanated a ghostly energy. It was just a lifeless piece of metal, a reminder of a tragedy that had occurred, and of a horrifying secret she would carry for the rest of her life. This story is a reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets are not the ones we seek, but the ones that find us. It's also a reminder that even in the most tragic moments, there is a glimmer of hope, a chance to stand up and fight for what we believe in. Let me know what you thought of this story. Have you ever felt that there was something mysterious in your life? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss other horror, mystery, and moving stories. See you in the next video.